Hey, I'm Magda, vehicle artist here at Rivet Games, and today I'm going to show you around the modelling and texturing process on the cab of our class 385. This is the 385 cab interior. As you can see, it's a model subdivided into three tight areas. One is the driving area, one is the non-driving area, and then there's a corridor passage that links the interior carriages together. So this is how we start modelling a cab. We first of all bring in the exterior model to help us figure out the proportions, and we start building like blockouts to figure out how and where things should be accordingly. So if we take off the exterior now, you can see that the beginning of this cab was where the back walls were and where the walls for the mid corridor were. Then if we go into a further iteration of the cab, we can see how I've blocked out the main pieces for the interiors of the cab. So we block out different pieces to try and figure out the proportion of things and to make sure that we give appropriate space for the desk, which is one of the most important items within the cab, obviously. And then we go to a further iteration where you can see I start adding details, especially to the ceiling and to the back walls. As you can see, I went from blocking out to starting with the back walls, and you can see that I start detailing, and you can start seeing how the progression evolves. And then to get to the final product, this is where we arrive by going through and detailing every piece. Getting the right dimensions for this cab interior was quite hard, seeing as when navigating in the 3D perspective, as you can tell, each space is quite narrow, so it's quite hard to make sure that we kept it realistic and maintained the small constricted space, but at the same time made it accessible to the player and made sure that the spaces were playable. This is the way that these interiors transform to get from just a corridor to a functioning cab. And if we look on the interior, we can see how the different doors fold so as to give space for the driver and the conductor to seat in their positions and make this become the functioning front cab that drives the train. These names are the different bones for the rig. So every name that you see corresponds to a bone. Place these bones and name them and make sure that the mesh is assigned to each bone. For example, the way to do that was you select a piece, and if you, for example, select this and you look, you can see that every single vertex of this button, I've asked it to correspond to the bone door release 202, which is this bone here. So when I go and try and control this bone, it controls this. You then export the rig with the mesh, and then the programmers are able to create a control which then works within the game by using this bone. And obviously it's up to Adam's discretion whether that he thinks a control is useful or should be used within. So what usually happens is that every button or everything that I see needs to move, I then create a control for, but he might not think that there needs to be a control for example, this controls the temperature within the cab, and so I don't believe that he would make this an actual control, because you can't turn the heat up yet in Unreal in game. We then pass on to the texturing. As you can see, the exploded parts are to help with the baking. Because of the constrained nature of the cab, I needed quite a few pieces to be exploded off so as to get a good bake. And apart from that, the texturing was pretty straightforward, and we made sure to bake also other animated elements such as the key, and I've exploded off buttons that were giving off shadows. I take the needles or the button covers away from the mesh when baking, because otherwise it would cast a shadow on the actual piece, so that, for example, if this button, I don't have to do it with every button. As you can see, I've kept this button on, but that's because these UVs are overlapping, and therefore this button is actually this button as well, and this button as well. And I've taken this, the only button that it's important to take off was this one, because when you'd open this button you'd have a black shadow here as if the button hadn't moved, and obviously that wouldn't look natural or wouldn't look good. You don't have to do this with everything. For example, you can see here there's a shadow behind this, but that doesn't look unnatural in game because this doesn't move. So if this square had to move, it would look odd if the shadow behind it didn't move with it. You can see like bakes that have happened. For example, this is the bake for the cab emissive, and it shows off all the buttons and all the bake for the emissive. The way that works is, for example, this is emissive 2, and that's these buttons here, and when you bake, it's important that you get an ambient, a normal map, space normal, and a position, and those are highly important. So to be able to texture properly, you bring those in, and then you're able to place materials and decals on to create the texture. Another piece I wanted to show off is the coupler. So this piece gets done towards the end of the project, and we model it by bringing in the exterior and placing it on the front of the train. We then bring it to the 0 point for exportation. This coupler had an animation linked to it as well, so this is in its closed position, but we then create the animation for it as well so that it opens. When the command is given, it opens and it links up to the coupler of the other train. We then texture it, and you texture it open and exploded. As I explained earlier for the cab, if we textured it closed, first of all I wouldn't be able to texture underneath here, and I wouldn't be able to add the detail, but then I also would struggle with this thing would cast a shadow. So you explode everything that would cast a shadow so that the final piece looks good, and then we can see it in Unreal placed in position at the front of the train. This has been a quick overview of the workflow of how we created the Class 385. Thank you for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and see you again soon.